The nature of monkey was irrepressible.
Migrant issues, racial issues, immigration issues are very much tied into emotional pressure points for a lot of people, and there is a weakness in human psychology in that we tend to look for intentional agency and patterns and conspiracy where it doesn't necessarily exist. This is a byproduct of our evolution setting out to predict what other humans might be up to so we can anticipate, and because evolutionarily speaking it's better to be slightly more paranoid. A twig cracks in a forest. Is it one of your friends out there, or might it be a saber-tooth out to eat you? The person who is more cautious and treats it as though it were a saber-tooth tends to survive and pass on that tendency, both culturally and through evolutionary psychology, biology. All of these things tie together. So when I did my video on the Kalergi plan, which doesn't exist, there is no plan, I was expecting some pushback from people, and it was there, some of which I deleted because it added nothing of any real substance to the conversation. But still, we do have this issue with migration. To what degree you believe it to be an issue probably depends on what political camp you find yourself in. You've got two extremes, one saying no borders whatsoever, everyone should be able to travel wherever at any point, no problem, and the other extreme being very tightly nationalistic and isolationist. That's a pretty big centre in which to exist, and you can even hold fairly radical positions and still be in the centre between those two extremes. But I'm not particularly interested in getting into the arguments for or against in this video. What I want to do here is explain really why we have this problem. Many people aren't even going to consider it a problem, but there are issues that it throws up that we do need to tackle. And putting our hands over our ears and going la 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 and pretending that these problems don't exist, failing to argue back against the kinds of people who are actually isolationist and nationalistic, and it's not going to forward things or make things any better for anyone. But there are a bunch of complicated issues that feed into, for sake of ease, we'll call it the migrant crisis. There's economic issues, there's environmental issues, there's all kinds of issues that feed into it. So climate change is not remotely contentious. Anthropogenic, that is human-caused climate change, isn't really very contentious as an issue, at least not in the scientific community. Syria may have had climate change issues, drought and so on, as a contribution to what has gone wrong there. The civil war has certainly been influenced by climate. Whether you think that's an early precursor to what we're going to see with more climate change, that is contentious. But droughts, storms, places becoming more inhospitable to life and so on, the frequency of more extreme climate events is going to increase as climate changes, and even if it's not directly responsible for what's going on in Syria, it does give us an idea, a picture of how things are likely to go. So that's one reason. As climate changes, as places become more inhospitable, less welcoming to human life, there's going to be pressure for people to move. Water scarcity is a related issue. That's another reason that people are going to be more inclined to move. There is an economic disparity between first world nations and third world nations that prompts people to move, searching for a better way of life. And because media is global, because the internet has strung us all together, even people with a cheap smartphone can use that and see how the other half lives. This was a big driving force behind the fall of the Soviet Union. Increased communication, particularly between West and East Berlin, allowed one half to see how the other half were living and to want to be like that. You can hardly blame people for having aspirations and wanting a better life for themselves and being willing and able to upend their lives and move to another nation, legally or illegally, in order to seek to better themselves. So there's that. More and more, the inevitable arrow of history, I think, is leading us to larger and larger power and economic blocs. North America, the European Union, Pan-Africanism, Pacific Rim nations coming together and consolidating trade and so on. And so the idea of a national identity, the idea of a nation, is an idea that's on the wane for all the people that are kicking and screaming about it. Free trade is the kind of capitalistic side to that. Less borders is kind of the internationalist side to that. But these are both forces that drive people to move. Capitalism is looking for cheap labour, and if it can outsource, it will, otherwise it will import that labour. Why can't home nations do it? Well, we'll get to that in a sec, but part of it is also our affluence. Nobody aspires to be a street sweeper or a toilet cleaner or a shelf stacker or whatever when they're at school. People have their pride, and so they're unwilling to do these jobs, particularly since they're low wages. So that encourages companies and so on to agitate and press for people to come in from outside. So these are all contributory issues. There are others besides exploitation and internationalism and globalism and climate and everything else. There's one really big issue in first world nations that is really driving all of this far more than all these other factors. Demography is a son of a bitch. And simplistically put, what this problem boils down to is that after the Great Depression and after World War II, your grandparents fucked too much. There was this huge glut of children that people had been holding off on having due to the world not seeming like a particularly welcoming or wonderful place, and then they had them all at once. And they had them when they were younger, they got married when they were younger. I think the average age of marriage went from 22 to 20 during that period. And so there's this massive bulge of children, the boomers. And that has slowly made its way upwards through the ranks of the population by age. After that, due to the introduction of the pill, legalization of abortion, and a great deal more affluence in first world Western nations, birth rates went down a lot. Now, normally you'd expect a reasonably smooth pyramid, with there being less old people and more young people, because people die off as they age. But as well as this boom, this problem has been compounded by the fact that our medical science has gotten a lot better. People are living longer, people are living with diseases and other medical issues longer. Infant mortality is down as well. These are all good things, but when you look at it demographically, it all adds up to one gigantic population time bomb, where a whole bunch of old people, outnumbering younger people, are going to exit the workforce as a progressive bloc, and increase demands on society for social care, for welfare, for pensions, anything else you care to mention. And normally there would be more young people to spread the cost out, and there just aren't anymore. There's less and less young people. This bulge is noticeable in the UK population, in the US population, but it's even more obvious in Japan, because Japan hasn't been importing immigrants in any meaningful numbers, despite having gone through a similar population boom and bust as the rest of us. They're attempting to deal with their problem via automation and information technology and so forth, whereas we've dealt with it in Europe and America, at least to some degree, by importing people. But the people we import start to have less children as they integrate into the culture, as their culture within their communities changes, as they become more affluent, they stop having as many babies, just like everybody else. And so that means it's only ever a temporary solution. Now, eventually this bulge is going to pass through and out, and the boomers are going to die off, and then we may settle into some kind of new equilibrium. But these problems are long-term, and they are drastic, and that is the main driving force behind the need for immigration. While we may have had this nationalistic spasm with Trump and Brexit and so on, that work is still going to need to be done. And to get people to do it, and to do it competently, is either going to require immigration anyway, and that there being no way to escape that, or automation, which requires a huge infrastructure cost and investment and does away with a lot of jobs, which has its own problems. You know, those are the two main solutions. We continue to allow people to immigrate, or we automate. But there's no way around it, really. The work needs to be done. Maybe you can offer more money, and that might encourage some natives to do it. That's one solution, but that's going to push costs and inflation up and put a huge amount of strain on society itself. There is no good solution here, particularly not the simplistic solutions of knee-jerk nationalists, isolationists, and yes, racists. There are some people out there who are genuinely racist. It's the memes, not the genes. It's the culture. And when we import people and they do assimilate, they just take on the culture, and that perpetuates the issue to a degree. We can't continue to grow our population natively anyway. We can't just encourage people to have kids, because the earth is a finite resource. So like I said, there's no good solution. And the real big reason that there's a problem is that your grandparents fuck too much. Zang.
Today. See, I don't like the, I have, okay, like a lot of you, I hate a lot, you know? But I hate with style and creativity. Yeah!